A couple of words about the Policy Institute and the Asia Society generally. The Asia Society Policy Institute obviously has its eye fairly constantly trained on India in its work and its reports and such. We had actually, I'm reminded, in this room last year we had the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, but we welcome many business and political delegations from India throughout the year. And ever since November 9th in this country, November 9th of last year, the day after the election, we have been busy working on various policy suggestions and reports and the like for the Trump administration. Most recently published a special report, The Trump Administration's India Opportunity. Its author, Marshall Bhutan, is with us. And I commend you to that and all of the Policy Institute's work at asiasociety.org. And the team can also provide you with copies if you like. And on the cultural front, I should mention we don't often have summer exhibitions in our galleries, but we have a spectacular one that has just opened and is on view just downstairs until the 6th of August. It is called Lucid Dreams, South Asian Art of the Diaspora, and it features 19 brilliant contemporary artists who have made their homes in the United States from South Asia, and they have made their art here as well. That is downstairs. Now, how this next portion will go, now that we are upstairs, we will have 3 panels, all in their own way tied to the overall theme of this day, India and the U.S. Partners in Progress, all of high interest for the U.S. India relationship. After the first, as I said, there will be a break, but we really ask you to keep it to the 15 minutes we've allotted for that, and lunch will be available in the back. The first panel is on defense, trade, and security partnerships. This is, as probably most of you will know, a very warm area and an active and successful one. When you think of Partners in Progress, India is ramping up its military and defense capabilities. Between 2012 and 2016, India was the largest arms importer in the world, and obviously this presents an area of opportunity for American companies, many of whom are present here today. So I'm going to ask our panel, panel number 1 of this session, to come up. If you can sneak behind me here so we save a little time, or take a hop if you're feeling energetic. Cara Abercrombie, come on, Cara, don't be shy, is Deputy Assistant Secretary of Secretary of Defense for South and Southeast Asia. Mark Lippert, just taking his seat to my right now, is Vice President, International Government Affairs for Boeing. We knew him also as the United States Ambassador to the Republic of Korea not long ago. Srinivas Pulikam is CEO of Axiscades, which is an engineering technology company. And moderating this session, closest to me, is Umber Dubey, partner and head of aerospace and defense for our good friends at KPMG. Why don't we give a warm welcome to this group, and on to you. Thank you.
Good morning and namaskar. It's always a pleasure to be here. I thank IFA, FICCI, Asia Society, US IBC for this great honor. I mean, as you can see, we couldn't have pulled a better panel than this. Some very, very distinguished people, and I'll have the privilege of also introducing them a little more than Tom. And the other good thing is that it just feels good to be seeing so many Indians. Welcome to our friends from US, but also Indians. I've never seen so many Indians per square feet in the U.S. It reminds me from where I come from, Gurgaon, which is a suburb of New Delhi, and it's also God's work, because I came in on Sunday, and yesterday we spent the last 4 days in Washington meeting some old friends from the aerospace and defense community. Yesterday I landed up at Dulles Airport, all excited, only to be told that the flight's been cancelled because New York is facing stormy weather. And so we then rushed all the way back to the Penn Station where we came from, and luckily we are here. So we barely slept half an hour last night, so please pardon me if we switch from aerospace and defense to maybe film and entertainment suddenly, but just give me a knock on my head and we'll come back to this. Okay, just a quick round of introductions. Tom has anyway been kind enough to introduce them, but Cara, great to have you here. A great friend of India, great expert on India. She's the current deputy assistant Secretary of Defense for South and Southeast Asia, very, very strong knowledge about our geography. And the good part is that she's on the other part of Asia as well, which is the Far East, and pretty much that's almost 40% of the entire and a very exciting continent of Asia. She's a graduate from Dartmouth and has also done her postgrad from Princeton. Next to me is Ambassador Mark, has already been introduced as the ex-ambassador to Korea, rated by the Korean media and some of the politicians, and praise is very difficult to come by from such people as the best ever U.S. ambassador to Korea. So maybe we can have a good round of applause for Mark Lippert there. And as they say, every scar has a story. You'll see a long scar running down his right cheek that took just about, I guess, 80 stitches?
80.
This is a Korean gentleman who just decided to sharpen his carving skills on his face. He survived that, and he's amongst us, and great to have you here, Mark. And not was he just the youngest ambassador. At 41, he carries the world record of being the youngest ambassador for U.S. He's also an alumnus of Stanford. And some of you may see some Chinese friends calling him Li Mokai. That's not a bad word. That's a name which he christened himself with because he did some studies in the Peking University. And as a custom is that you give yourself a Chinese name, and Li Mokai. So if somebody calls Mark Li Mokai, don't be surprised. He's also been part of the naval intel. He's seen a lot of action. He did a detachment in Iraq with the Navy SEALs, got a Bronze Star, nothing less, Bronze Star in Iraq. And so a lot of exciting stuff which Mark has done in the short life that he's had so far. And Srinivas, our friend from India, he just sort of balances out the panel, 2:2 with US and India. And in fact, a little more on the the weight side. And he's the president and CEO. Don't mind my... I'm just trying to be funny.
I was about to say that.
So he's the president and CEO of Axis Cadis. Axis Cadis is one of those fastest growing small medium enterprises, which is no more small and no more medium. They're supplied to, they're proud partners of Airbus, Bombardier. They've even done work with Rafael, IAI. The list is too long. And we'd rather leave it to Srinivas to talk about it. He's got over 2 decades of experience in engineering services across aerospace and defense, heavy engineering, energy, automotive. He's a Six Sigma black belt, a PMP, and a Master of Engineer from Mysore, and has done our Global Business Leaders course at HBS. So you can just imagine what kind of a panel we have. Okay, before we get into the discussion, just a quick overview of the aerospace and defense industry as it's panning out. Tom has already made an introduction about how exciting the sector looks like. Never have we been felt, the people who've been in the industry for the last 20 odd years, never felt as excited both on the aerospace and defense side and all the aviation, civil aviation side. Since the morning you saw Ambassador Riva, and the panel which followed also referred a lot to the things which are happening there, because this has traditionally been a little slow sector because of maybe you can call it policy paralysis or slow decisions or long-drawn procurement. So all those are things which plague aerospace and defense, because in defense, as you all know, the market comprises just one customer, the government of that country. And if that customer doesn't open up its purse strings and let the 2 magic letters called PO, purchase orders. Purchase orders is the lifeblood. So if the purchase orders don't happen, pretty much no investment, no jobs will happen. India and US, there's nothing left to talk about being traditional allies, the oldest democracies, and we should be together. Yes, we all know that. We also have this huge NRI audience, PIOs. They are a great asset to both countries, which is fantastic. We also have a very interesting neighborhood. The 3 naughty boys, there's China, India, and Pakistan. Pretty much in love with each other. With Pakistan, we've already had four rounds of powwows, and it still continues in a proxy way in the northern state of Jammu Kashmir. Keeps media people very active. Then suddenly we picked up a fight with China also in a small dagger's neck, as we call it, between Sikkim, Bhutan, and part of China, which we used to call Tibet earlier. But so there's a bit of a jostling and pushing around happening. Thankfully, since 1962, when we had the last war with China, we haven't had any fighting as much as we have on a daily basis with our friendly neighbors on the western side. But in China, suddenly this little jostling and pushing has now reached a level where almost 3,000 people on either side just standing there facing each other, bayonets ready. So a lot of action happening. China, we feel, with all due respects, as the naughty boy who suddenly has superpower ambitions, wants to get there faster than US did and in maybe 1/3 the time. And that is creating a lot of bad behavior. Hopefully that should improve. Now, India, the other big problem with India is that we are also looking for jobs. We have 1.3 billion people, maybe four times US, with maybe 1/4 the land area and the resources. So jobs are a big thing. Elections are won and lost on jobs. So we had this big push on Make in India, and we'll talk about that when our experts speak about it. There's a lot of talk about tech transfer because India is now sick and tired of being just a buyer. As Tom also mentioned, we are the largest importer of defense equipment, and it's not something that we wear with pride, right? So we actually jostle with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia suddenly just inched ahead, and we feel very happy about that. But we pretty much fight with Saudi as the largest importer. Is not something that we feel very proud about, especially given the fact that we've done exceedingly well in the high-tech areas like space and nuclear, and the reasons we'll discuss as part of the discussion, because I don't want to take the heat away. Slow orders have hurt us. A new great change which is happening is this strategic partnership, not the one between India and US, but there's a strategic partnership model being brought into India. Again, we'll discuss more. I would rather leave it to Srinivas to talk about it, in which we're saying now we are going to create our Boeings and Airbuses, because earlier the problem was that we felt we did the systematic alienation of the private sector. They call it a trust deficit, but it was more of insecurity. Perhaps the government-owned enterprises did not feel secure enough. They felt that if we allow the Tatas, Mahindras, and L&Ts to come in, because they're smarter, fitter, whatever, and entrepreneurial risk-taking, and the promotions and increments are based on merit and not just based on your cadre or seniority, they might just take the whole initiative away. Yeah. So, and then FIPB, which is a Foreign Investment Promotion Board, that has been taken out. Planning commissions taken out. So a lot of exciting things happening. The key thing now that the US industry now has to look at is to, are we going to be this farmer versus hunter concept? Are we going to farm on this relationship based on the way things are going? And that is a question which we'll leave to the panel. Or is it just going to be the hunter approach, which is show me the money, honey. If I see an order, then I'm going to come in and invest, and etc. But if I don't, I'll move on to other places. And there are lots of exciting developments. We did have a little hiccup around the Pokhran Blast, 98, and that did create a little bit of a rift between you when we had the sanctions. But then amends were made. Even in the Kargil war, which followed the next year in 99, we saw President Clinton playing a good role there to end hostilities in a good manner. And then we've had various nuclear agreements and NSG waivers, especially for India. In the recent visit with Mr. Modi, we also saw the Guardian drone, which is the only country outside NATO which has got this equipment. So I think positive things, a lot of positive things happening. And just quickly, 10 seconds on the civil aviation side. We've had the first National Civil Aviation Policy, which was released last year, which is the first time in 70 years we actually have a policy, so you don't need to actually go up and down to the ministry to figure out what is the mood of the minister or the secretary that day. Then there's a regional connectivity, which is opening up a lot of opportunities in the interiors, and we spoke about large orders which have happened of Airbus and Bombardier, the ATRs, etc. There are a lot of big aircraft orders also. For the first time, a US president has actually acknowledged the role of Indian aviation in creating jobs in the aerospace industry when he spoke about the SpiceJet order worth 22-odd billion. And airports, because Indians are now flying like never before. You heard about the 22% growth rate which is happening. We are the fastest growing civil aviation market in the world. China is at about 11, 12, Russia is about 8, 9, and US is about 4 or 5%, and global average is about 3 to 4%. We are growing at 22% because Indians, just because of this oil price crash, it suddenly reached a level where most Indians can now find it affordable to happen. So which means more opportunities on the airport side also. And also air navigation, because the radars and sensors, great opportunity for US companies, choppers, MRO training. I mean, the list is endless. So this is where I'll stop. And I would then quickly move to the lady. We'll start with the lady first. Cara, you've been right there, up close and personal. You've seen it all. Your thoughts about which way is the Indo-US relationship going? What are some of the key roadblocks that we have to look at? And what are the positive steps that both governments need to take it to the next level? Cara.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you for that scene setter. Yes, I've had the privilege of having a front row seat to U.S. India defense relations for more than a decade. And I can tell you the trajectory is incredibly positive. We've come a long, long way in 2 decades. And just to put a little bit of perspective on it, Back in the early 2000s, defense trade was at $0. We're now at more than $15 billion in a relatively short period of time. So while it seems that there may be insurmountable barriers, I think we have to give ourselves a pretty good pat on the back for how well we've actually done in recent years. But I'd like to just give you a bit of a broader perspective, the broader context for the overall defense and security relationship. And I neglected to thank our hosts here, FICCI, IFA, and Asia Society for inviting us all here today. Thank you. So again, we've made huge progress, but I think we've just scratched the surface of the potential of this relationship. The U.S. and India, as has been stated many times already today, have a very broad-based strategic partnership that is really rooted in our shared values, being democracies, but increasingly our aligned interests as we look at the global order. And when we look at the evolving security environment within Asia, India's rise, India's role that's evolving within that context, we see the U.S. and India increasingly viewing the region in the same way and seeing that our interests are very much aligned. And so it behooves us to cooperate more in the defense space. And we do this in a number of ways. We have, within the Defense Department, high-level policy dialogues on a range of issues. We have our militaries engaging on a regular basis. At least we were trying to count at least 100 times a year through the various meetings, activities, exercises, exchanges, what have you. We do have the trade piece, which has been quite critical to advancing the relationship. And increasingly, we're looking for ways to have technology cooperation through co-production, co-development. And again, this is all rooted in when we look at the region, we have the same maritime security interests. We have the same counter-proliferation, counter-piracy, counter-terrorism. Fundamentally, we have the same interest in upholding this international system that upholds the rule of law, that favors freedom of navigation, open sea lanes of communication, freedom of overflight. Those are values that are critically important to the United States and India, to our economic prosperity, and to our access in the region. So I'm happy to go deeper later, but just a few comments on the military piece. You'll see our navies are exercising today in the 21st iteration of the Malabar Naval Exercise. We've now brought the Japan Self-Defense Forces in as permanent members. We have each of the Navy's largest ships participating this time around, which is tremendous, and I encourage you to go look at Twitter. The pictures are fantastic. And again, within trade, we have sold India our C-130s, our C-17s, our P-8s, our Chinooks, our Apaches, and the offer by the United States government of the Guardian UAV is incredibly significant. It demonstrates the value we place on this relationship, and it demonstrates that when we classified India as a major defense partner last year, that has meaning. And again, I'm happy to answer questions on that. It was not just a label for India. We actually now have export regulations on the books demonstrating that we should assume a presumption of offer when we are looking to sell things to India. Our Commerce Department should assume approval, presumption of approval, not denial, which had been something on the books in the past. And we've also looked at giving Indian companies validated end-user status, which will open up, will limit the number of licenses that Indian companies will have to pursue if they get that validated end-user status. So these are major steps forward that we're taking. There is work to be done. There are obstacles, as many of you are aware of. Fundamentally, when it comes to defense trade, our bureaucracies are not well aligned. The United States defense export system evolved over many decades during the Cold War, when if you were going to buy arms from the United States, there wasn't any competition. It was going to be us or the Soviets. The Indian system now is looking at itself as a major, major arms importer and a major, major defense capabilities developer in its own right. And India is naturally saying, if we're the buyer, we get to set the rules. And they are fundamentally misaligned with the U.S. export rules. And so we are carefully working through this, through what we've established, this Defense Trade and Technology Initiative, to look at ways to align our bureaucracies to overcome that, because at the end of the day, we do want to cooperate, and we don't want basic bureaucratic impediments to inadvertently undermine our ability to cooperate together. So I will just leave it at that.
Fantastic. Let me, thank you so much. Yeah, the volume here? Yeah, okay. Let me bring in Srinivas here. Srini, you work across the spectrum, right? You worked with the French, you worked with the Americans, the Israelis. How would you compare your U.S. partners or dealing with the U.S. companies? And please don't be politically correct.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to everyone in this room, and it's a wonderful question. So definitely the experience coming from how European companies, Israeli companies, or U.S. companies that are working in terms of aerospace and defense sector is concerned. One fundamental thing is transfer of technology, which doesn't happen from U.S. companies. That's true 100% from European companies or Israeli companies. For example, I can take quite a bit of examples on that. If you look at Airbus, we do support Airbus on multiple programs. Airbus is procuring, they're sourcing 2 billion products, worth of products cumulatively until 2020 right now. And they do outsource 100 million engineering services business just to India every year. And then apart from that, Airbus has developed completely outsourced centers, offshore development centers in India, where they develop A350, A380 kind of modern aircrafts with wings and fuselages completely developed in India. And not only that, on the defense side, Thales, as a major defense manufacturer, they have set up 3 JVs, joint ventures in India, and also strategic partnerships in India. And apart from that, they also they have a strategy called Go to India, where India has this strategy, Make in India. That's with the Prime Minister Modi slogan, which has brought up a lot of manufacturing avenues. They're building a wonderful partner ecosystem, transferring 100% technology, building the base in India, which is these companies are setting up themselves to build the opportunities in India to do more defense side of the business. For example, Indian government, if you see the offsets is one area where we seriously, that's not being leveraged. That's a wonderful opportunity. There is a gap. That means there is a wonderful opportunity for U.S. industry and Indian industry to work on defense. Indian government has 1 billion opportunity every year to develop on offsets, to leverage offsets discharge. Offsets discharge as such is not being fully leveraged. So there are billions of multi-billion dollars of offsets that are backlogged in India. And that's where US companies and Indian companies should collaborate, develop it together, and transfer technology. And companies like today, fortunately, FICCI and US IBC, these are the firms that we have been seeing, they too can play a dominant role in terms of bridging the gap, set up, navigate the companies, US companies, to steer through the policies of defense policies, and leverage, set up working groups, and there can be multiple initiatives that can be brought up to develop this defense manufacturing.
Srini, sorry to interrupt, but let me just challenge you there. One of the challenges that we hear from our friends in the US is that, and also maybe Europe, that Indian industry is not yet ready to absorb the sort of technology that they have perfected over the last 70 years. I mean, how do you react to that? Do you agree, first of all, and if you disagree, why?
No, I disagree there, because it was true some time back, not anymore. Initially, India is Indian companies were looking for captives. That's where US was setting up captive centers, and it's no more for capital. Right now, it's more you leverage, as India developed as a buying power, and they're leveraging other countries like European countries or Israelis or the multiple countries, multiple companies have been developing technology there. Today we are working with companies like Airbus quite extensively, where today Airbus has AP 1020 is a certification delegation that is given to Indian company like Axis Cadis, which is a private company. We are the signatory for Airbus development, manufacturing. There is something called concessions. When they do concessions on the aircraft design have to be certified for any deviations. And that is certified by Axis Cadis. So that's a big step if you see how a company like Airbus can depend upon for technology and leveraging a partner to sign off on an aircraft to be, say, okay and take off.
Right, right. Fantastic. So let me switch to Mark. Mark, you've been on the policy side, you've seen active duty, you've done intel, you've done diplomacy, and now you're with a very major aerospace company. How do you see the way this U.S.-India relationship has gone, and what are the quick 2 or 3 things that both countries need to do to take it to the next level? And you heard Srini, so maybe later on you can also touch upon this intraoperability. I mean, it's a very long word, intraoperability concept, where today any Indian player, if he does something, say like UTAS did it for, I think, Boeing, and earlier they had to bring the components all the way to US and get certified, and then it goes to the assembly line, or the FAA, investigators or inspectors would have to come at a very high cost to India and certify the products, and then it goes to the assembly line. Now that is not going to work. So if there's some way that what Srinivas was mentioning, say if Boeing can start certifying, or having some parties in India who can certify on Boeing's behalf, so that this extra cost, which makes it uncompetitive, can also be taken care of. So all yours, Mark.
Sure. Well, I've been at the Boeing company for a sum total of 2 months, so I'm at the height of my expertise. And it's, you know, the good news, it's a small company that does very uncomplicated work. So I figured it all out. But let me just say, in my previous life, you know, I was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia, and that's broadly defined in the Pentagon, includes India. And so Cara and I logged many, many miles with Ash Carter, first as Deputy Secretary, then as Secretary, who really was first with Shiv Shankar Menon, and then later on with other counterparts, really helped, I think, operationalize the defense cooperation, which we now call DTTI framework. And, you know, I think there were 3 main objectives in the early days. One was to just bring ourselves into a much closer relationship through the defense and aerospace industry that, you know, fit neatly under where the relationship was going at a strategic level. The second was to align our 2 systems, as Cara said, and align it in terms of exercises, align it in terms of policy dialogues, but align it better in terms of export control and industrial participation regimes, so we didn't have the bureaucratic tail wagging the strategic dog. And as Cara said, I think good work has been done. Department of Commerce has come a long way. A lot of work left to do. But there's no doubt that things are closer. And the third, I think, main objective, which touches on the topic we just were sort of stumbled upon, was change from, you know, vendor-supplier to partnership. Right, and that's really underway, and you now see that, you know, in a range of different areas. You know, on the exercise front, you see more exercises with India. The U.S. is number one, or the U.S. is India's number 1 partner of choice on exercises. The defense dialogues are deeper, broader, more substantive, solve real issues, lead to tangible results. And on the export control system, you have seen progress, as I just alluded to. On, you know, I would just say, you know, in terms of Boeing, one of the reasons I signed up with Boeing is because of its work in India, and it is interesting. Boeing is now in a shift of moving from really a U.S.-based company to an international company, and you know, we look at the India relationship incredibly strategically, and also hold it in really, really high regard. And you know, we have a slogan in Boeing that's operationalized, but it's bringing the best of Boeing to India and the best of India to Boeing, and that really engenders the way we look at this country. And a few just tangible results: our engineering and technology center, which is really path-breaking for Boeing abroad, has grown 4 times over the last just a couple of years, and that is on a hockey stick growth trajectory. Second, you know, we entered into a joint venture with Tata and the production facility in Hyderabad, which will eventually do sole production of AH-64 Apache fuselages. That was moved actually out of Korea into India. And that's a big deal when you're working on Apaches together. That is one of the crown jewels of the Boeing empire, and also it's really one of the crown jewels of the U.S. Army's Rotary Wing Aviation Division that we depend on each and every day. Finally, I would just say 3 times growth in services. And just to cap it all off, what we do about $1 billion of sourcing out of India each year. So it's not just selling things into India. This is a partnership that is growing, maturing. Again, more work to do. Final thing I would just say, a couple of thoughts for the future in the last minute. First, I do like the focus on maritime that our countries are going down to in a strategic way. I think, look, India has a very capable naval foundation on which to build. I actually had the privilege of, when I was ambassador to South Korea, of attending 2 Indian ship visits to Korea. And you see the Indian Navy starting to move out in a way you didn't see a decade ago. Second, the strategic challenges, a lot of them are maritime, and I think that's where there's work we can do quickly to catch up. The third is there's lots of platform, tangible work we can do together. We're working on carrier technology, the fighter campaigns, undersea, and then, of course, unmanned systems. And finally, it's a very flexible type of work in that it can be used in combined arms situations on land, but also in sea. You're not sort of binding yourself, and it's really helping develop with India and the U.S. a very flexible force that can be deployed and project power. And then finally, politically, it's not as sensitive always to work on naval cooperation. Navies have this great tradition of working together. They go around the world together. They drink a lot of grog together, which always seems to be less politically sensitive and sort of cross boundaries and cultures easier.
No, Mark, it's interesting that you brought up the Navy part. In fact, 3 years back, we actually had the sitting naval chief resigning because we had a submarine accident, and he took personal ownership of that, and he said somewhere Navy is that sort of a neglected baby of the family, and after that we saw a sudden shift in the focus towards Navy, and you're absolutely right. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, Navy is the only force, the defense forces, which can actually cross the boundaries and circumnavigate the world, whereas in the Air Force or land, you can't just cross the borders and go into somebody else's airspace without permission. So I think that's incredibly important. And and also you talked about the Korean collaboration. So I think on the minesweepers, we have this very close relationship within Goa Shipyard and the Gangnam base in Korea. You were in Korea. You watched it very closely. Are there some lessons which you have from the Korean aerospace industries which India can learn from?
A great question. Look, first of all, you do see a lot of similarities in terms of where India is in terms of high-tech ability, capacity, strong engineering, cadres and corps, great human capital. And so I think that is the platform on which the Korea model was launched. I think that's point one. The second point is, I think, how you engage with your partners and allies really matters. In terms of, look, Korea still imports large numbers of U.S. platforms and capabilities, but they've also done a very smart thing. Japanese have as well. They haven't always gone for big companies as industrial champions, but they've do a little of that, but also anchor themselves into the value-add supply chain. And I think India is well poised to do both and. You see it really on the civil aviation side with the Japanese. There is no other company or country that works to integrate into different supply chains like the Japanese do without having an industrial champion. India is a country that can do both, big enough, but I'm just saying don't neglect one after the other. And the last thing I would say is what you do see in both India and in Korea is shared common values. And I do believe at the end of the day, that really matters. That matters in terms of openness and transparency. That matters into self-correction in terms of policy promulgation. And it also translates into vibrant, robust free markets and civil society that I do think play an important backdrop in driving all of this technological cooperation that India and the United States are so interested in doing together.
Sure. Fantastic. Cara, let me come to you. So let's go back to that farmer versus hunter example. Should U.S. firms be only hunters, which they are generally perceived to be, could be wrong, or should they be farmers looking at the way the overall relationship is growing? It's not just the defense part, but the overall relationship, irrespective of who's in power, with the Prime Minister or the President here. Do you think, what would be you've watched it from outside, you have these delegations from Boeing and Boeing to popular pressure. So what do you think is the best way out there? Or a combination of the two?
I think a combination of the two. And I think the challenge that in the defense space, and I can only speak to that, the challenge that U.S. companies often find is we don't have state-owned enterprises. U.S. government is not going and making deals for U.S. companies. U.S. companies have to find a business case. And oftentimes, this is where the misalignment comes into play. The U.S. government does play a role because we do control the most sensitive technologies, which candidly, that's where we are in the relationship with India. We are looking at very sophisticated technologies that the U.S. has to approve release of or tech transfer of or co-production of. So it's been a very strong partnership, but that puts us in a little bit of a different footing than other countries. So it has to be a partnership where the U.S. company makes the business case to sees that offsets make sense for them financially, and then they work with the U.S. government to ensure that we can provide the tech transfer or the release of technology that the Indian government requires. And this is, and I think in other countries you'll see governments have state-owned enterprises where they can perhaps make different arrangements that are more convenient for the Indian government. And to Mark's point about the national interest and the alignment of our desire to work together, to be interoperable, to work together to secure and provide stability, we would like to see the Indian government working with the U.S. government in partnership to ensure, again, that these acquisition policies don't disadvantage U.S. companies just because we can't get the lowest price or because we're so transparent, we give you the full price for the next 30 years and it looks appallingly high, or that tech transfer looks a little bit too challenging. We'd like to be able to sit down at the front end and ensure that the acquisition process is fair and meets India's intent and interests, but doesn't unfairly disqualify or disadvantage companies that frankly help us help India's national interests.
Shini, let's take the argument further from there, because Cara made an interesting point about, the others may make whatever, cheap booze, we make wine, French wine. Oh, not French wine, American good quality wine. So this cannot come at the cheapest price. And if the approach of the Defense Ministry is always going to be, as long as we meet the bare minimum technical threshold, the SQRs, SPRs, and then everybody's equal and the cheapest wins. How do we get out of that? Because we've seen a very powerful government, a particular political party, we had 80% of the parliament seats lose the elections just basis one bad deal. And now our CBI, which is their equivalent of API, is going to open up the case all over again because we are getting close to an election now. So what's your view? I mean, can we really get out of this L1 business, or is it a fact of life which American companies will have to live with and maybe create a lesser version? I mean, by lesser, I don't mean inferior version, but maybe some of the bells and whistles can be taken out because L1 is going to be there forever. I mean, I know it's a sensitive question.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point Cara brought up. In fact, the offsets are concerned, right now there is a big gap. And the gap need to be addressed. The gap is in terms of India is no more looking for build-to-print kind of things. That's where if you are referring to L1s, it's not anymore build-to-print. I again bring the analogy from European companies where 100% technology transfer is taking place. And India government is also looking at offsets in terms of giving more credits for technology transfers, skill development, and things like that. So that's where the focus is really. And any US company you want to develop a business there, it definitely need to get higher credits. And in terms of policy is concerned, I think there is a need for both the governments to work, facilitate this. Our bodies like FICCI and U.S. IBC can join, set up some roadmap, working groups. In fact, my chairman happened to be, my vice chairman of Access Cadis happened to be Aerospace and Defense's chairman for FICCI. And there's a message from him that we will set up seminars in India in 3 major cities, Bangalore being electronics development, Hyderabad being manufacturing base, and either Delhi or Nagpur for the other strategic reasons, where we can conduct some kind of seminars with the U.S. industry and Indian industry jointly representing a working group that we can form. And then this working group can create a model in specific areas of development where can make recommendations in terms of what policy matters, create, eliminate some of those gaps in terms of policy issues. And that is the right model where it can be really take progress and to move forward.
Right. Mark, let me come back to you again, that same farmer versus hunter question. Now, if I take the example of the Koreans, okay, in India, they've been incredibly successful on the consumer goods side. So today, if you go to any Indian home, there will be an LG or a Samsung refrigerator or a microwave oven, including mine. So, and they came in about 20 or 30 years back as a farmer. They sowed their seeds and they plowed the fields. And they created Indian jobs, they created taxes and whatever revenue for the government. And they were never noisy. They were always under the surface. In fact, their organizations also, the Korean industry organizations, they worked very quietly under the surface. The end result is that, say, 15, 20 years down the line, they have almost displaced most of the Indian consumer goods companies and are there in literally every Indian home from lower middle class to the upper class. Is this something which can be applied in the case of aerospace and defense? I know there are differences. And my last part of the question is that India is known for its frugal engineering and software prowess. Is this some way these positives can be leveraged to bring down the cost of American goods or equipment or technology, which can be then sold at a cheaper price around the world to create a win-win? Where you've used the American expertise, you've used bits of that frugal engineering and the software part, combine the two, and then win all over the world, not just in US and India.
Yeah. Well, where do I start? Great questions. First, I would say, look, the one thing that and let me back up and say, Korea has been a fantastic success story, right? There's no doubt about it. At the same time, the Korean economy today faces serious challenges.
Right.
So, I think if you go around the world and you see Samsung and LG and other and you think that it's this utopian kind of fantastic model, it's not. It's at a major crossroads. So I just would caution people that this export-led growth model that worked 1970s, 1980s, 1990s isn't necessarily a model that one wants to replicate today.
Sure.
So point one. Point two, I would also say, the Koreans are also into the aerospace industry, and they're having issues, to be frank. Their net exports are down this year from year on year, and they had a whole 10-year strategy that's not on plan. And I think that underscores the point that it's a very different industry. There are national governments are much more involved. National interests are much more involved. There are certain markets that are just off limits you'll never get into. So it's a much different game that requires, I think, different thinking and orientation, right? And that brings to the last point, which is I do think you have a point in terms of, look, I think American companies, and I think Boeing is among them, we don't look at India as a place to go in and just sell product and exploit low-cost labor. We view it as there are centers of excellence, right? And that's precisely why we put in a path-breaking engineering center of excellence that is growing as we speak. And so I do think that we view there are opportunities there that will, to your point, create not just wins in India, but together it will create wins in the United States, and working together, synergies with a global supply chain, wins in other markets. So I do think that there's something there. I think Boeing is going down that path, and I do think it is a path that we view as a path where India adds a lot of value to what the Boeing Corporation does, not just in India, but around the world.
Fantastic. And we did give you Pichai and Nadella, so I mean, there's a lot of talent out there.
Yeah.
Okay, what we can do is maybe spice it up a little. I think we have time for maybe 2 questions. If somebody wants to ask a question, keep it very, very short, and we'll request the answers also to be very short so that we can take more questions here. Yes, please. Do we have some microphone? Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you. This is a terrific panel. Just a brief introduction. I work for SAIC, and we do roughly about $5 billion of U.S. defense business. And I go to my executives at SAIC and tell them about the U.S., the India business, and they say next. What is the next topic? So there is zero interest in the sense. Here there is a very structured ecosystem where you're able to get a forecast of opportunities. There's a Freedom of Information Act where you get where the funding is, where the opportunities are. And that visibility is missing in the Indian defense market. Just wanted to get your comments.
Great question. Srini, you want to take that? I know you're not from the government, though you would love to, but how can we get more? I think that's a fair question. How can we, see, it's like manufacturing. If you're manufacturing, say, steel or automotive or, say, refrigerators, you need to have some forecast about how the spends are and per capita purchases, et cetera, et cetera. In defense, there's only one buyer, so how do we address that?
Yeah, So it's relevant to more of U.S. market. I strongly agree with what he asked. The roadmap is missing. So that's where U.S. companies need to come out and set up the roadmap and then talk about what is the sourcing that is being planned and work out for that. So that's where one of the recommendations that we have to work, strengthen to develop this business.
No, Srini, sorry to interrupt, but I guess if I got him right, his question is more about the Indian government putting out this roadmap that these are the number of helicopters or attack helicopters or fighter jets of this size or that size, medium, small, or say ships, frigates, corvettes, or whatever, so that the companies can then look at a 15-year long-range plan. We have something like an LTT, IP, etc., but it's not still that granular, if I got the question right.
True, yeah. So that is to evolve. That is to evolve. And today, what I can say is it's number one in terms of US has emerged as number one trade partner with India, but it's all fragmented, as you said, definitely. And in last 10 years, it's a great progress in terms of 20 billion is the overall trade purchase between US and India.
Right.
And it crossed Russia, which is decades long, trade partner.
I think that's a big positive that
one.
Srini, thanks for raising that. And for ladies and gentlemen, this is a big positive which we many times miss out. 90% of our critical equipment which is defending India today is all Russian, whether it's like fighter jets or aircraft carriers or helicopters or anti-aircraft guns, or tanks, everything is of Russian made. And and just 2 years back, US has actually overtaken that. And it's a massive shift. It has happened very subtly. So with all the negatives about slow procurement, I think there is certain a crawling way in which US is coming up and taking pole position.
In fact, started with Boeing. In fact,
Sure.
P8I, which is back into 20.
Boeing is the one who's breaking
12,
it in.
yep.
Mark, you
Not even.
want to add something?
Well, I would just say, look, to your question, just on the U.S., look, I think what we saw early in DTTI is precisely what you identified, which is there was a misalignment that we heard a lot about on the U.S. side about export controls, all that. But there was also what I would call a need for facilitation of the business environment inside of India. Just that it looked more familiar to U.S. companies that wanted to help foster competition and partner with Indian companies. So I think you're exactly right on that. I think there's work to do. The second point I would just say is I think that there's nothing like education, going to India, meeting with US IBC, meeting with other people. But I think we still have to sort of figure out how to get that not just sort of in the non-governmental space, but get that more inculcated in the government space. And finally, what I would say is, and we used them a lot when we worked at the Pentagon, but I also did this when I worked in Korea as the ambassador, go see the embassy. The embassy, they have a group there that can help navigate. A lot of people think, oh, the embassy only does, in the case of Korea, talks about North Korea all day. No, we actually, help U.S. companies navigate really tough bureaucratic frameworks. And I think, go see the folks in Delhi. Rich Verma, my good friend, is gone, but he napped half the day in India. But in all seriousness, I know this was one of his priorities, to try to figure out how to help U.S. Companies navigate and enter in this market as well.
No, I think you're bang on, Mark, and full marks to Rich Verma's colleagues also, John McCaslin, George Sibley, and now Pat Santillo has come in. The U.S. Embassy is actually the sort of a point of envy for the Rolls-Royce and the French company, because many times we hear that the way U.S. Embassy engages with the Indian government, and every time, you have thankfully 50 states, so every time a governor or a trade mission comes, we see those very informal closed-door meetings where inside the embassy, where people also feel, the government people also feel a little more comfortable coming there and having that closed-door conversations, and I think that's a great platform which the U.S. Embassy plays a role. And also U.S. IBC and the other agencies, FICCI, I think they have a role cut out. Cara? Okay, there was something called a logistics agreement, a memorandum of agreement, LEMOA, a landmark agreement, which allows U.S. ships and Indian naval ships to actually use each other's bases for rest and recreation and refits and repairs. The lady who drafted it, or significant parts of it, is right here, Cara. Big round of applause for Cara. Cara, your thoughts on the same question about predictability, because how else do you plan?
That would go a long way to helping U.S. companies. I feel there's a little bit of there's a little network. I mean, we all rely on our networks to sort of, so who did you talk to in the Indian Army? What do you think they're going to procure? Did you hear anything from the Navy? What's the Air Force saying? And we all sort of triangulate the different bits of information. And I know this is hard for companies. I know American companies struggle with justifying back to headquarters maintaining the expense of maintaining an office in Delhi because even if a procurement is a certainty, the timeline may not be. And that is a difficult thing for our companies to sustain. So certainly we would welcome that. And that is what one thing, as Mark was saying, the U.S. government does try to help at least share what information we've received.
And try to get the Indian government to rationalize this process. That was one of the dialogue points we had over and over again, with varying degrees of success. But it's something that I think down the line we should continue to push, and getting that informal network into a formalized government space that is readily accessible is a critical priority.
Great. In the interest of time, let's take one last question. I know there's several hands, and we have a lunch break where you can attack these experts again. Lady here in the front. Yeah. Just use the microphone, please.
Superb
You should be loud enough so that the people who are on the WhatsApp at the back, they also sit
Can
up
you
and take
hear
note.
me? It's a superb panel. My question is both to Mark and Cara. In the broader changes in the strategic and operationalization of this relationship, is there any movement on two issues, intelligence sharing and rules of engagement?
Cara, you want to go first?
Yeah.
Certainly. So I would say across the board, there is improvement in our overall cooperation, and that was reaffirmed by the Prime Minister's visit to Washington just 2 weeks ago, where I think there was a bit of angst in India whether the new administration would continue the trajectory that we'd seen between President Obama and Prime Minister Modi, and the result of that visit was a resounding yes. This is a very important strategic partnership, and we have reaffirmed our commitment to cooperate more in the defense space, and that involves just the things that you mentioned.
Because one good trick he uses is what we call in Hindi jadoo ki chappi, which is actually the hug, the famous hug is like a spine-crushing hug.
There were three.
And,
There were three.
It breaks boundaries, brings people together. Maybe we can take one more question. At the back, I think we have to be fair to the back. If you can just quickly rush a mic to the gentleman standing. It's getting interesting, but I see Anubhav giving me those dirty looks from the side. So, and we don't want to be between your lunch. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to talk about offsets. What you guys need to do is figure a different way to do offsets. Instead of directing everything back into aviation and defense, you took some of the offsets and you allocated them into other sectors, construction, education, and so forth, change the face of India. You guys won't do that. You need to change offsets.
Well, the only reason those guys don't do that is that because they say the whole purpose of offset is to create an aerospace industry. So now if you're going to build public toilets or schools, I mean, that's not really building an aerospace industry. So I think that's the problem. Mark, you want to add to that?
This was something we talked about. So it's a fair point. This is something that was in the U.S. government thinking, look, offsets are a hard nut to crack in any country. The Koreans have their offsets, but look, it's not an unfair point for dialogue, and let me leave it at that.
I would just add, I think, for perspective again, the size of the sales that India is contemplating, the dollar amount, the amount of money India is spending, when you take a proportion of that and require, if it's a $2 billion sale and you're looking at a significant proportion of that must be reinvested in offsets, but there is an FDI cap of now 49%, 51%, it makes it almost impossible for a defense company to find a defense space area to invest in. So it's an issue of orders of magnitude and investment caps, and there's a whole mix that goes into it. But officially, the U.S. government does not comment on offsets because we don't support them.
Sheila, you want to add to that quickly?
I agree with what Cara and Mark said.
Right. More questions? Yeah. One last question.
We're out of time.
Okay.
Thank
you so much. Just want to thank our panel. Thank you so much.
lunch will be